April 15, 1945, southwest of Bergen, Nazi Germany. The rumble of British tanks echoed through the gates of Bergen-Belsen, a place that seemed torn straight from the depths of hell. What awaited the liberators was a nightmare beyond imagination. More than 13,000 corpses, their bodies left to rot in open fields like broken dolls, and 60,000 emaciated prisoners, living skeletons barely clinging to existence. The soldiers, hardened by years of war, were struck silent. The stench of decay hung heavy, an invisible fog that clung to their uniforms and seeped into their souls. They had come face to face with the physical remains of a genocide that words could never truly capture. But amid the horror of Bergen-Belsen, among the SS guards seized that day, was a young woman who seemed to defy the very laws of human nature. She was just 22 years old, strikingly beautiful, with delicate features and piercing blue eyes. To the unknowing, she might have looked like an angel. But behind that angelic mask lurked a heart twisted by cruelty. Her name was IRMA GRESE, a woman whose crimes would etch her into history under a chilling title, The Beautiful Beast. Her presence at Belsen was not the beginning of her story. It was the climax, the final act in a blood-soaked career that had already spanned Ravensbrück and Auschwitz. How does an innocent farm girl become one of the most feared female guards of the Nazi regime? How does beauty become a mask for sadism, and how did she, at such a young age, embrace a life drenched in cruelty and power? Tonight, we step into the shadows of history to uncover the making of a monster. October 7th, 1923, in a small rural town called Fürstenberg, Germany, a baby girl was born into a modest dairy farming family. Her name was IRMA Ida Ilse GRESE. She was the third of 5 children, growing up in a world that seemed simple, quiet, and far removed from the tides of politics and war. Her childhood should have been ordinary, filled with farm chores, village festivals, and the rhythms of country life. Her father, Alfred GRESE, was a strict and sometimes violent man. But unlike many around him, he harbored deep resentment toward the Nazis. As their movement began to rise in 1933, when Adolf Hitler seized power, Germany's classrooms, radios, and public spaces became saturated with Nazi propaganda. Boys marched in Hitler Youth uniforms, and girls were drawn into the League of German Maidens. But Alfred stood firm, refusing to let his children join. It might have been an act of principle, even of courage, but it also created a paradox. By resisting the regime's pull, Alfred thought he was protecting his children. Instead, he may have been fueling in young IRMA a dangerous sense of rebellion, a hunger for belonging that would later drive her toward the very ideology he despised. Then came tragedy. In 1936, when IRMA was only 13, her world was shattered. Her mother, Berta, discovered her husband's affair. Broken by betrayal, Berta ended her life. Overnight, the fragile stability of the GRESE household collapsed. The loss of her mother left IRMA adrift. The father who remained was not a figure of comfort, but a source of violence and discipline. He lashed out at his children with his fists and his belt, teaching them that strength came not from compassion, but from domination. At school, IRMA struggled. She was ridiculed by classmates. Her grades fell, and by the age of 14, she abandoned her education entirely. What remained was a teenage girl, bruised by loss, scarred by abuse, and desperate to escape a world where she felt small, powerless, and unwanted. For the next few years, she drifted. 6 months working on a farm, then in a shop, then jobless again. Each attempt ended the same way: failure, rejection, humiliation. But beneath the quiet despair, something else was brewing: a bitterness, a hunger for control. And in 1939, when the world descended into war, IRMA GRESE found herself at a crossroads. The very ideology her father had resisted would soon become her path to power and her path into darkness. At 15, IRMA GRESE seemed like a lost soul, drifting through life. But fate soon delivered her into the hands of the very machinery that would shape her into a monster. She found work at the Hohenlichen Sanatorium, a seemingly ordinary medical facility. Yet behind its sterile walls, cruelty masqueraded as science. The institution was run by Dr. Karl Gebhardt, one of Heinrich Himmler's favored physicians. Gebhardt would later be infamous for conducting human experiments inside concentration camps. But even in the early years, his medical practices carried the cold, clinical detachment of a man who saw human lives as tools. Here, young Irma began as a simple nurse's assistant. She was supposed to bring water, clean floors, fetch supplies. Instead, she found herself drawn deeper into the nightmarish practices of Nazi medicine. Witnesses would later testify that she wasn't merely an observer, she participated. A teenager, barely 16, was already assisting with treatments that blurred the line between healing and torture. For 2 years, Irma's humanity eroded, piece by piece. In a place where compassion should have flourished, she learned indifference. Where empathy should have guided her, she absorbed detachment. She saw suffering not as tragedy, but as routine. Her dream of becoming a certified nurse collapsed. Her poor education barred her from the path. Instead, she was pushed aside, sent to churn butter on a dairy farm. The rejection festered. She had tasted a dark kind of power, and now she was stripped of it. Each day at the butter machine, each monotonous movement built inside her a restless fury. By 1942, that fury found its outlet. At 17, Irma GRESE applied to join the SS Auxiliary Service. The Nazi state, hungry for loyal guards to oversee its growing network of camps, welcomed her application. Soon, she boarded a train. Its destination, Ravensbrück, the notorious women's concentration camp. What awaited her there would not be just a job. It would be an initiation into violence, into sadism, into a world where human life meant nothing. It was here that Irma GRESE would take her first steps toward becoming the beautiful beast. July 1942, the iron doors of Ravensbrück concentration camp closed behind 17-year-old Irma GRESE. This was not merely a prison, it was a factory of death, a place designed to strip human beings of their dignity until there was nothing left. Over 130,000 women would pass through Ravensbrück. 92,000 would never leave alive. For Irma, this was not a place of horror. It was a school, the SS Women's Training Ground. Here, cruelty was not punished. It was taught, sharpened, and rewarded. Her instructor was Dorothea Binz, a sadistic overseer whose name still sends shivers through survivor testimonies. Binz taught her recruits a simple creed: extract labor until death, and then extract more. For Irma, who had known nothing but humiliation and powerlessness, this was intoxicating. For the first time, she held authority over others, authority backed by the most feared regime in the world. Under Binz's watch, Irma learned how to command prisoners, how to break their spirit, how to turn punishment into performance. But Ravensbrück offered her something even darker, a reunion with Dr. Karl Gebhardt, the same physician she had once served at Hohenlychen. He was here now, conducting grotesque experiments on Polish women, deliberately breaking their legs, infecting open wounds, amputating without anesthesia. 80 women became his victims. Many perished, screaming. Those who lived bore scars and disfigurements for the rest of their lives. Standing at his side was Irma GRESE, no longer just the assistant nurse, but an eager participant. She watched the agony, absorbed the cruelty, and, chillingly, felt excitement rather than disgust. By 18, Irma had become a full SS guard. The awkward, bullied teenager had transformed into someone who relished her newfound dominance. Her whip became her voice, her uniform, her armor. In 1943, she went home briefly and spoke casually of her work at Ravensbrück. Her father, horrified, beat her with a belt and forbade her from returning. But it was too late. The monster had already been born. The camps had given her purpose, identity, and a perverse kind of power she could not abandon. Soon, she was transferred to the epicenter of Nazi brutality, Auschwitz-Birkenau. There, in the largest extermination camp the world has ever known, she would rise higher still, feared by thousands and worshipped within SS ranks as the model of a loyal female guard. The farm girl had vanished. What remained was a young woman drunk on power, blind to morality, and walking willingly deeper into the abyss. March 1943, the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau swallowed Irma GRESE whole, and within its sprawling barbed wire walls, she found her true stage. Auschwitz was not merely a camp. It was an industrialized death machine, where thousands of men, women, and children were processed, stripped, and erased from existence every single day. For Irma, Auschwitz was intoxicating. Here, she no longer had to hide her cruelty. It was encouraged, applauded, even admired by her peers. Prisoners soon whispered a name that clung to her like poison: Die schöne Bestie, the beautiful beast. At first glance, she seemed angelic. Survivors described her as breathtaking, delicate features, flawless skin, piercing blue eyes. Dr. Gisela Pearl, a Jewish prisoner forced to assist Nazi doctors, would later say, "She was one of the most beautiful women I had ever seen." But behind that angelic mask was a heart hardened into steel. Her weapon of choice was a whip of plaited cellophane, light in weight, easy to clean of blood. Every morning, as columns of prisoners shuffled to work, she would lash out without reason, striking faces, backs, legs. Not for discipline, but for pleasure. Even when Camp Commandant Joseph Kramer warned her to stop, disgusted by her excess, she ignored him. She was beyond restraint. By May 1944, at just 20 years old, IRMA was promoted to senior guard of Birkenau's Camp C, overseeing 30,000 Hungarian Jews crammed into space built for barely a few thousand. Conditions were nightmarish. 5 prisoners to a bunk, thousands lying on bare floors slick with excrement. The stench of death filled the barracks. This was IRMA's kingdom, and she ruled it with terror. Her punishments were sadistic. Prisoners forced to stand for hours with heavy stones above their heads. Roll calls stretching from 3 a.m. until dawn in freezing cold, any slight movement earning a savage beating. Women collapsed in mud only to be dragged up again until unconscious. But her cruelty went far beyond violence. Survivors testified that IRMA used prisoners for her own twisted desires. When she tired of them, she sent them to the gas chambers, snuffing out lives with a shrug. She allegedly maintained an affair with the infamous Dr. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death himself, joining him during selections to decide who would live and who would die. Her jealousies were deadly. Survivor Olga Lengyel recalled how IRMA deliberately sent young, beautiful women to their deaths out of spite. She could not bear competition. Olga wrote, "If a prisoner was more attractive, she made sure she did not live another day." The depths of her depravity shocked even hardened SS officers. She kept 2 Alsatian dogs, deliberately half-starved. With a smile, she unleashed them on prisoners who faltered during labor or stumbled carrying stones. Women were torn apart as she watched, her eyes alight with fascination. And yet, amidst this ocean of cruelty, one paradox lingered. She spared a 14-year-old girl, Alice Locke Kahana, not once but 16 times from the gas chambers. Each time Mengele selected Alice to die, IRMA pulled her back. Why? Because Alice resembled IRMA's sister, Helene. In this twisted echo of humanity, IRMA revealed that she could still recognize the bond of family, but only for herself. For thousands of other sisters, daughters, and mothers, she showed no mercy. At Auschwitz, IRMA GRESE reached the height of her power, but power fed on itself. The shy, bullied child had been replaced by a woman drunk on dominance. Her beauty masked an abyss of violence. And as the war turned against Germany, she carried that abyss with her, to her final stage, the hell of Bergen-Belsen. Behind the barbed wire and guard towers, IRMA GRESE's life was not only defined by violence, it was also twisted by her search for intimacy, beauty, and recognition. To prisoners, she was terror incarnate. But to herself, she was still a young woman, vain and ambitious, craving attention in ways as unsettling as they were revealing. IRMA was obsessed with her appearance. Survivors recalled how she carefully styled her golden hair, wore polished boots, and even applied rouge to her cheeks. In a place where thousands starved, she pined before mirrors. The incongruity was striking. The camp was a graveyard, yet she fussed over looking flawless, as though she were preparing for a stage. She surrounded herself with symbols of power, a riding crop always in her hand, a whip slung at her side, starving dogs at her command. For IRMA, these were not just tools. They were extensions of her identity, props that elevated her above both prisoners and peers. But her personal relationships revealed something darker still. Testimonies suggest she engaged in affairs with both male and female prisoners. To those trapped in the camp, her attention was a death sentence, affection one day, the gas chamber the next. The intimacy was poisoned, transactional, and entirely about control. When she grew bored, lives ended. Her rumored relationship with Josef Mengele gave her proximity to selections, the dreaded process where human beings were divided into workers or the condemned. It was said she relished this role, striding beside him, her eyes scanning prisoners, her hand pointing who would live and who would die. Power and desire fused into one intoxicating ritual. And yet, beneath her arrogance lay contradictions. She spoke often of becoming famous after the war, not as a criminal, but as a film star. In her delusion, she saw herself not as a monster, but as a woman destined for stardom, admired for her beauty. The gap between reality and her self-image was chilling. Even in moments when she displayed a flicker of humanity, sparing young Alice Tenenbaum because she resembled her sister, it was not empathy for humanity at large, but a warped reflection of her own ego and family ties. Her life behind the uniform was a theater of extremes, vanity in the midst of mass death, desire entwined with cruelty, dreams of glamour built on the ashes of her victims. She was not only a guard, she was an actress, staging scenes of power, beauty, and fear for an audience that never consented to watch. But the curtain was destined to fall, for even as she lived this grotesque double life, the Reich itself was collapsing, and Irma Grese would soon face a reckoning she could neither control nor charm her way out of. January 1945. The Red Army was advancing, and Auschwitz was crumbling. The SS ordered thousands of prisoners onto death marches, forced evacuations through snow and ice, where the weak collapsed and were shot on the roadside. Irma joined these marches, her whip and dog still at her side, pushing exhausted prisoners toward an unknown fate. By March 1945, she was reassigned to Bergen-Belsen, a camp descending into absolute chaos. With supply lines shattered and the Nazi regime collapsing, conditions there became apocalyptic. Overcrowded barracks overflowed with human waste. Typhus and starvation claimed 250 to 300 lives a day. Prisoners lay dying on bare floors, sharing just 200 blankets among tens of thousands. Even in this hell, Irma continued her reign of cruelty. Survivors remembered her stripping women naked, beating them with rubber truncheons, or forcing the dying to perform physical exercises until they collapsed. Days before liberation, she was seen smashing the heads of two sisters together for the crime of eating discarded potato peels. To the prisoners, she quickly earned a new name, the Beast of Belsen. April 15, 1945. British tanks rolled through the gates. Liberation had come. But so had the reckoning. Only 2 days later, on April 17th, Irma Grese was captured by British forces. She did not resist. She did not beg. Instead, when questioned by a journalist about her crimes, she coldly replied, "It was our duty to exterminate antisocial elements so that Germany's future would be assured." No remorse, no hesitation. At the Belsen trial, survivor after survivor took the stand to describe her sadism. The beatings, the dogs, the selections, the jealousy that condemned innocent women to die. Confronted with overwhelming testimony, Irma denied everything. She admitted to discipline, but dismissed the rest as lies, sneering that witnesses were making an elephant out of a fly. Her arrogance stunned even her captors. In prison, awaiting judgment, she styled her hair daily, smiled coyly at guards, and spoke of becoming a movie star after the war. In her mind, the trial was just a performance, and she, the glamorous lead. But history would not grant her the ending she dreamed of. On November 17, 1945, Irma was sentenced to death by hanging, the youngest woman executed under British law in the 20th century. December 13, 1945, executioner Albert Pierre Point prepared the gallows at Hamelin Prison. As she stepped forward, Irma displayed no fear. She wore a faint smile, as if still playing a role. When asked for her final words, she spoke only one: "Schnell." Quickly. And then, with a sharp drop, it was over. The beautiful beast was no more. No tears were shed. No family wept for a woman who had taken so much life. Her own ended swiftly, coldly, and without ceremony. The story of Irma Grese is one of the most haunting paradoxes of the Second World War. She was young, beautiful, with the kind of face one might expect on a film poster or in a family portrait. Yet beneath that exterior lived a spirit consumed by hatred, envy, and a hunger for domination. Her life forces us to confront an unsettling truth. Evil does not always come with a monstrous face. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it looks like an ordinary girl from a dairy farm. Sometimes it dazzles with blue eyes and golden hair. And in that deception lies the greatest danger. Irma's cruelty was not born overnight. It grew slowly, from a broken home, from indoctrination, from a society where violence became the currency of power. Her story reminds us that monsters are not simply born. They are made, piece by ideology, by hate, by indifference. And yet, even at the height of her crimes, she clung to delusion. She dreamed of stardom, of fame, of being admired. She believed beauty would shield her from justice. But the gallows at Hamelin proved otherwise. Her beauty could not save her. Her youth could not save her. History would remember her not as an actress, but as the beautiful beast. The victims she tormented deserved better. They deserved life, love, and tomorrow. Instead, their names are now carved into history's silence, a silence broken only by testimonies of their suffering. So what lesson does her story leave us with? Perhaps it is this: that evil hides among us, often in plain sight, waiting for the world's indifference to give it room to grow. How many other Irms might be walking among us today, their true nature hidden behind charm, ambition, or beauty? The answer is terrifying, because history has shown us that when hate is left unchecked, when cruelty is excused, and when power is given to those who lust for it, another will rise. Never forget the victims. Never forget the faces behind the numbers. And never forget that humanity's darkest chapters are always one act of silence away from being repeated. The story of Irma Grisi is not only a reminder of what happened,